Well, thank you, Graham, for that kind introduction, and I would just add on in the last 2 years, my managerial role in the 13Fs at Seaforth Netball. We made the playoffs, so I think you missed that off. I don't know how you missed that. But we do thank you, Graham, for KPMG's involvement. Certainly, one of the things you learn in business is that you need partners. The quality of people, the quality of relationships, the quality of partners you have, they are the key to achieving success. And certainly KPMG has been a fantastic partner for the state government on a range of issues, and as have many around the room. And I thank everyone that's been involved in helping to get this state moving again, because certainly I believe we have had some action, we have had some results, and everyone who has been a partner has played a critical role. So we thank KPMG for hosting today and for the role and partnership with the government. Peter, we thank you for the opportunity to speak at the McKell Institute. First chance to do that. Something I look forward to, and there's a proud history that comes to the Institute, and certainly pushing public policy is something I think we need to do more of. And I certainly think the business community has a far greater role and scope than it currently does. So it's great to have a chance to push that here today. It's great to have a former Treasurer here, indeed a former Coalition Treasurer in Peter Collins. If you look at him, he's actually looking younger than when he left politics. So I think there's a good model in that. I'm trying. My daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, did remind me that when she looked at my head on the weekend, she said, "I can see a lot more grey hairs, Dad." But that's a 14-year-old daughter for you. But when you see Peter, it is great to have someone who was part of a government that wanted to make a difference to the state, and I think as a Treasurer he had a fantastic role in that. And it's also great to have a journalist here, and I won't name her, but Michaela Whitburn. It's great to have her because ever since ICAC has been on, she has ignored everything else in state politics. So for some reason she's here. So I think we should celebrate that. So welcome, Michaela. We hope that there's something interesting to write about. I don't think it'll be as interesting, but hopefully there's a few things to talk about. Listen, as I reflected and we looked at the McKell Institute and the history, the interesting thing is it was based and founded on William McKell, who was the Premier in 1941 to 1947. You go back those times, some interesting times, and he was actually given credit for restoring credibility and stability back to the Labor Party after a bit of a challenging period of the Jack Lang years. And I guess that as you look at what the O'Farrell government is dealing with, I would say, not being too political about it, there was certainly some turmoil in the last years of the former government, and I see what we are hoping to do as the O'Farrell government is return stability and sensible direction back to this state. And certainly, I think we've done that, and I've said to Barry a couple of times, stable and sensible is the new sexy. And I certainly think that in terms of a government that is actually taking its time and considered decisions, is taking directions in the long-term interest of the state and not looking for short-term actions in terms of polls or election cycles, I think that is exactly what any community is looking for. And certainly I think that that's what you're starting to see. But as you reflect, I mean, there are many challenges that we inherited, many, and I'm not going to list them, and I'm not going to give you a big quantitative analysis today. But I do want to qualitatively just talk about how we've dealt with those, and just three principles I want to run through. And it's not only how we've dealt with them, but how also I think we deal with them going forward. And actually what the community is expecting for and looking for from government leaders around the world. And the three themes that I think I want to touch on are honesty, creativity, and cooperation. I think they're three things that we can learn a lot about. And the thing about honesty is I think that, we must, it's pretty simple. We must be honest with the public in terms of the choices that come along with funding vital infrastructure. So the community says they want infrastructure. We know that they need it. We sit in the traffic. We understand the state of some of our hospitals. We know the problems with the public transport. So people want infrastructure. So on the basis is you have to have an honest discussion about it. And I certainly think I'll touch on why I think that we've started to do that in exactly the right way. I also think you have to be innovative in the thinking, in the delivery of services and capital works. Innovation in business is often stand side by side with strategy, with finance at the top level of the board. But often in government it's left behind. So the question is, how can you be innovative? Because when you look at the challenges we have, we're right up against it in terms of the AAA rating. We've got debt levels that are high. We have a massive infrastructure backlog. You have revenue that's falling, but demand for services particularly in the aged care sector, the disability sector, the health sector, continue to exponentially rise. You've got an infrastructure backlog, which has been estimated by New South Wales Infrastructure New South Wales, at about $30 billion. So you can't do everything. So the question is, can we do things differently to start to challenge some of those? And I certainly think that we are doing that, and I'll touch on that. And the third is, and it's not going to be any surprise, I think that we need cooperation from the Commonwealth Government, not what I would call political games. Someone's described to me, how do you move forward in terms of cooperative federalism? And I said, I think the first thing you need to do is to establish a joint mission. So before you get to negotiating deals and transactions and funding and who does what and what sort of split, well, what's the joint mission? And any of those involved in negotiating terms or transactions, if you come together at the top in terms of a joint mission, this is good for both of us, or state and country, in what way, shape or form, well, the rest starts to take care of itself. And I think we have a long way to go in terms of tackling that. So honesty, the first thing is honesty, and it is a difficult balancing act, and certainly that's what I've tried to describe in my role as Treasurer. I'm not trying to pretend the finances are in great shape, because they're not. We have a real challenge. We have lost over $2.5 billion a year in revenue. And when you look at the underlying surplus or deficit position, it's a few hundred million either way, at the moment, and has been for a considerable period. That is not going to get you to a long-term sustainable path. To fund the infrastructure, you need to start, if you're not going to do it with debt, and we're right against limits in terms of the rating, then you have to produce and be creative with the way you're doing it. And I certainly think that what is the response? We've said, okay, well, if we're aligning our expenditure and revenue with it falling, then what you have to do is look at your balance sheet, as any business would. There is capital that's sitting there. How can we release that and get it to work for the state? And there is a lot of history and political histrionics that have gone around those sort of debates in the state. But I think we need to remove them. And we need to understand, yes, resistance will come, but ultimately it is the right thing for the people of this state. If you want the infrastructure, which we do need, it is the only way that we can go about it. And I certainly think last week's transaction is a clear demonstration. For everyone in New South Wales, it's fantastic that the state owned a port, or two ports, Port Kembla and Port Botany. But if you said to everyone in New South Wales, listen, we can get a private sector operator into the ports, they can actually bring forward investment. They've got access to capital investment, less constrained than we are, so they can bring forward investment. They can drive the logistics and efficiency gains of that port, which drives almost a heart into the economy. So we can have a new partner driving that, and at the same time, we can put $4.3 billion towards the infrastructure needs of the state. I think almost everyone would sign up. They would say, okay, well, that does mean $400 million extra to the Pacific Highway, $170 million to Princes Highway. The WestConnex project is no longer just a map. It has actually got the government funding attached to it. A unique concept that goes and has gone in the history of government in recent years. And I'm, not just here in New South Wales, I'm calling that across the state and country. If you want to win the credibility, when you start to produce the plans, you have to have the funding to go alongside them. It's the only way it's going to happen. And certainly I think that honesty in that discussion is something that we have started talking about, and you have to. And the opposition, when we announced this transaction, said, well, we've done nothing more than selling the family silver. Now, I would just say, to them, well, how are they going to do it? And that's what the community deserves. Let's stop having the sort of political shrill debates that have characterised us for so many years, and let's be real and genuine and honest about it. Because if you want the infrastructure, this is the way you're going to do it. And yes, you can have a political point and a political grab, but if you're going to do that and participate in this debate for the future of the state and the future of the nation, well, how about you tell us how you're going to do it? Because I would argue the community deserves much more than that. And ultimately, I'm disappointed where we are as a state and a nation on the back of it. And I think we need to elevate that sort of debate. We've also established economically sensible priorities. So if you release a capital, the question is, where do you put it? And I think that's one of the big achievements that we have undertaken as a government. Establish a body, look at the infrastructure need across the country and say, across the state, here are the priorities that are very clear in terms of the economic benefits towards the state. So this doesn't correlate with elections, federal or state. This is the needs for New South Wales. And my hope is, governments come and go. If we don't win the next election, this list will be very hard to shift off because it is a clear articulation through economic rigour and modelling on what is needed to go forward. I also think that the other unavoidable mechanism in funding the infrastructure is that word, tolling. If you want roads, you have to be prepared to say that tolling is required. And again, similarly, in relation to the WestConnex, the federal government, when they announced some potential funding towards the WestConnex project, so the biggest congestion drag on the city of Sydney in the biggest state in the country, they said, well, we're happy to put money in, but we don't think tolls should apply. Now that is just a nonsense. The question goes back to the federal government, well, how on earth is this project going to be funded? Cut through the nonsense and tell the people honestly how they are going to fund it. Because unless they're willing to say, well, here's another $7 or $8 billion that we're going to contribute, which means that we don't want the tolling, well then let's have a meaningful discussion on it. But until that happens, that is nothing more than raising expectations. It is taking a public policy decision that is not in the interests of this state or country, and it needs to change. It really needs to change. And that's why when we announced the WestConnex, it was very clear. We said we're going to release capital from the balance sheet, we're going to look for a contribution from the federal government, but if not, at the same time we are looking for tolls. So those who receive a benefit can make a contribution to this project. A user pays principle that I think is exactly the way we're going to get infrastructure delivered in this state. And the last thing I've spoken about, in being honest, is actually improving the tax base. And I have said the lowering the GST threshold is long overdue reform. When the GST was first announced and first envisaged, it wasn't really thought that the online would be such a phenomenon. So it is growing and exponentially growing. It is part of the retailing world. So we need to move much more towards the modern age in relation to that. It does happen around the world, $30 in Canada, $20 almost effectively in the UK. Those thresholds are lower. We're at $1,000. The current modelling suggests that just the GST on the online would raise $1 billion across the country in 3 years' time. Now, that is money, $300 million worth that would come to New South Wales. Now, not a popular decision, not something that's going to win me many Christmas cards, but it is the right thing for the long-term future of this state. And again, I think that's something that the community needs to start hearing from the political leadership in this country. The second point I want to talk about is creativity, and there's a couple of points in terms of looking outside the square. One is in the delivery of social services, and some in the room have been involved. In fact, I think Mission Australia might be here and others. But the social benefit bonds, I think, is an incredibly exciting development for this state, and social services full stop. For those that aren't familiar, we did announce last month a trial, and that's what it is, a trial. And I certainly think that what governments do as a general rule, they don't like to do anything that could potentially not work. And we said on the outset, listen, this may not work, but it is worth taking the risk, because the upside is so significant to this state, to social services. And it's one that we've made and delighted to make. And in simple terms, it says, okay, in a funding context, we're looking for additional investment, new investors, and provide a mechanism for them to go straight into social services. So Uniting Care have a program called NewPin, and effectively when a family is at risk, so children are removed from families, so they're either just at risk or there's court orders issued for the removal of that child. There is a program that comes together, intensive mentoring, counselling, which aims to keep that family together, to restore the child back to the family. Now, it's not going to surprise you that kids that come from families restored or stay with their families, the literacy, the numeracy, the employment, the health, are just immeasurably better. So it makes sense to try and focus in and actually try and keep kids out of home care and back in their family. Now, the cost, there is a cost to the state. If they are removed, $40,000 a year is the cost, and on average, 7 years sort of out of home care. So if you can keep them, return to their family, there is a natural saving. And what we are doing at the moment, or through this trial, is saying, okay, new investors, you can invest straight into this program. You can help those particular families and kids, a direct service, and if we're successful, we will share those savings with you. Nothing more complicated. There's a lot more complication underneath that, but that's the sense of it. So people that would normally make donations or grant or high net worth individuals, well, they've got a capacity to invest in that sort of program, help the state, help the families, help those broad communities, and at the same time, there is a potential return. And indeed, if they get to their saving levels, there may well be up to 15% return on those sort of investments. So in simple terms, at the moment, 25% of those kids are restored to their families. And under this program, the hope is they think that they can do 65%. So it's a huge shift forward. And what it does, and what I love about it, is it focuses on outcomes. And again, I think that's what we need to do as a government. There is a very easy political line that says, oh, we've put more money into it, so therefore we care about it. The better way is, what are you actually achieving in that particular area? And the focus on outcomes, I think, and tapping new resources, new investors, I think could be a benchmark for delivering a whole range of social services going forward for the state. The second thing, and the last thing in creativity I want to talk about is the Reliance Rail restructure, complete change of pace. Anyone that was involved in that PPP, please leave the room, because that did cause grey hair. But again, what do you do with the challenges that come into your end train? As you think about it, there are many diverse problems that you have to deal with, and often, if you consult and you engage and you talk to experts, you can come with an idea or an approach that hasn't been thought of that actually solves many of the things you're dealing with in a very positive way. Now, that, unfortunately, for the state, that PPP was connected to 78 new trains on the system, air-conditioned trains. If the PPP fell over, and the Transport Minister and I were faced with a very real challenge in relation to that, everything said that this PPP was about to end, was about to go bust, and there could be another 5 to 10 year delay in relation to getting new trains onto our network. On a range of measures, what we did, I think, was a smart thing. So it needed more money, but the state was absolutely determined to keep the PPP together, to keep the benefits together, which is exactly what we did. And we said, okay, if these trains are delivered, then we will put some additional money in to make sure that the ratios work. But it comes in as equity, and it comes in when all of the risk has effectively been removed. So everyone that signed up, you've got to deliver your obligations. We will put money in, but we'll put it in on these conditions. Now, as we stand here today, about half the trains have been delivered and are working well. And it is getting de-risked day in, day out. So I think we're going to get very close to it. What it does give us the capacity to do is that should the trains be delivered, I think the state can actually sell that equity position, potentially for a profit, because you've got a 30-year income stream as an operating and maintenance. There'll be a lot of people who'll be interested in that. So the state actually gets the trains, and we don't actually have to contribute. So that's the goal, but I certainly think that is a way of being creative with the challenges we face. Now, the last point I want to talk about before we move to questions is really this thing on cooperation. And I spoke about it at the start. You know, if you go to a state government and say, listen, you know, we think we want, whether it be education, whether it be NDIS, and say that we have this revolutionary approach to policies we are undertaking. Even carbon tax I will throw in there. And you sit down and you discuss the joint vision for the nation and the state's role in that. Well, that has to be the start. Because what I've seen day in, day out is policies such as those announced either in budget papers, in the Daily Telegraph, or the Financial Review, sorry, McKell, in the papers. So big policy ideas are actually put down without any engagement whatsoever with a state government. Now that is no way to fix this state. That is no way to fix the nation. I honestly say, I stand here, as does the Premier and I believe the Cabinet, that if there is something that is a long-term interest in this state and country, I don't care on the political badge that sits in Canberra. I am willing to talk about it constructively, in an engaged way. And ultimately, we are a long way from that. And I guess that, what I do on a regular basis is say, at my times down with the Federal Treasurer, we need a different approach to this. Now, that's not new, that's not rocket science, but I think until we do, we will continue to struggle to implement some of the reforms that are done. Bullying tactics, standoff, lack of consultation, ultimatums to deliver significant reforms without time is going to end up with a result that you do, which is piecemeal, which is not funded, which is political more than substance. And I think that is holding the country back. So I guess that my accountability and my ongoing invitation to the federal government is the door remains open. And certainly something like the online tax threshold, I would say, is something where we have, through reverse, actually established a constructive dialogue to, I think, a systemic problem that we are all facing. So in conclusion, I just add that despite the challenges we have faced, I think we've got progress. If you look at some of the economic data, it's still fragile. There are still challenges across this economy, no doubt about it. But whether we look at jobs growth, for the previous decade, it was slowest jobs growth, slowest economic growth. Well, in the last 2 years, we've got the highest jobs growth in this state across the country, and we've got the second highest economic growth. There's a rise in business confidence, there's a rise in consumer confidence, and housing. We are starting to see signs of life in the housing, not just the approval space, but actually the completion space. And that is a key part of the economy. Indeed, at 50-year lows is what we inherited. So in an economic narrative, we are moving forward. There is a lot of hard work that has gone on, laying out the platform, something like the ports transaction, something that took about 20 months from beginning to end. But the fruits of that come in the cranes to come. And I think that when you look at the next 12, 24, 36 months in New South Wales, it is hard not to be positive on the back of the infrastructure, on the back of the position we currently have. Despite the challenges that we're seeing around the world, I think we are in an incredible position to take advantage of that momentum. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.